if you could. Yes, thanks, Alts. So the recording is now started. Let's go forward. Forward in slide. Again, sorry. So here the project covers, you see in the slide, like some countries in the region. So from Estonia, we have down Latvia and Lithuania, and then there are some more countries, Poland and neighbors, where we have, let's say, reached in this project. And we also, so far, have been also, well, unfortunate with Ukraine. We have been doing some stuff there, but once the war broke out, this is not anymore something that is feasible in full scale. So this is our project. And that's that really. We are now in the stage, and in the next slide, of developing, well, what is, very ambitiously called policy roadmaps, let's say these white papers for national CCS development. And then we'll be monitoring how these roadmaps might be implemented, should some state or some actors want to do that. And yeah, that would conclude our project. But now let's go into the most important part of this workshop, of this seminar, by discussing what's happening in the Baltic states and what potential, let's say, steps might be. So I would like to give word to my colleague Valts and then other colleagues to explain what's happening.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Valts from Civita Latvia, senior consultant, and yes, as Arvinas mentioned, together with my colleagues from Estonia and Lithuania, we will introduce you to the roadmaps we developed. But yeah, first let's go through the agenda here and what we will cover in this part of the presentation. So firstly, it will be the current situation of the Baltic states. Afterwards, latest developments in the Baltic states after the end of our previous work package. And afterwards, we will introduce you to the national CCS roadmaps. So a bit about the existing situation regarding the project region. So basically, here is the map with the main CO2 emission sources into region in 2020. Exactly on this project scope countries. And yeah, we can divide CO2 emissions into two main categories, the industrial processes and electricity and heat production. And as we see, the biggest concentration of CO2 emission sources is in Poland, in Czechia, in Ukraine, especially in the eastern part. A little bit less of this concentration is in the southern region of the project, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Slovenia, Croatia. And yes, we will talk about those countries a little bit later in our next presentation. But if we look at the Baltic states, we can see the situation here regarding the main CO2 emission sources. Basically, there are three sources above 1 million tons of CO2 per year. Two of them are located in Lithuania. One is Achema, the biggest fertilizer producer in the Baltic states, which is located in the central part of Lithuania. The second one is Orlen, Lithuania, oil refinery near the border with Latvia, and the ST power station, energy production facility working with oil shale as energy source. In Narva, near the Narva. Yeah, and we can also take a look at the Baltic states in a more detailed manner. So basically adding the next main CO2 emission sources and geological storage possibilities that is showed in this map on the left side. And yeah, regarding Estonia, we can add also two of those emission sources that is on the energy and chemical production. Yeah, regarding Latvia, there we can also add three more sources that are that we can consider that although are below this 1 million tons of CO2 emissions per year. And those two sources are two thermal power stations that produce electricity and heat from natural gas. That's 1 and that's 2, with respectively 0.3 and 0.9 million tons per year of CO2. And yes, the next one, the next source in Latvia is cement manufacturer in Brocēni with 0.8 million tons of CO2 per year. And regarding Lithuania, the previously mentioned main emission sources, to those we can add also Akmenės Cementas, the biggest cement manufacturer in Lithuania, with 0.9 million tons of CO2 per year. And yeah, as you can see in this map with the blue circles, with the blue spots, we can also take a look at the geological storage places, of course, potential. And in short, about this point of view, the Baltic states are located in the Baltic sedimentary basin. It varies regarding the thickness, and there are a number of regional aquifers that could be suitable for CO2 storage. The largest number of them is in Latvia, approximately 16 places onshore in Latvia and few offshore. And in Lithuania, those are 3 places together, 2 onshore and 1 offshore. And yeah, we will take a look at the estimated capacity in one of the following slides. But yeah, as we can see in Lithuania, there is basically no prospective areas either on land or offshore. And thus we can come to the summary of the current situation in the Baltic states previously mentioned, and other important aspects regarding this topic. So basically in Estonia, there is no geological formations and yeah, no geological potential for carbon storage. Also, national planning documents do not see the CCS solutions. This is due to the high costs and unassessed environmental impact. And for Estonia, we can say that no definitive public image has been formed with those technologies. And among the other main barriers, it could be economic justification, financing, and the lack of suitable infrastructure that could also hinder CCS and CCU solutions, development of those solutions. Regarding Latvia, there, as you see, there is several geological structures onshore and offshore where CO2 could be stored. However, further geological research should be conducted to get more accurate information there. And since 2012, storage of CO2 in geological formations and in water column is prohibited in Latvia by law. With the communication with stakeholders and interviews and workshops, we understand that overall prospects for CCS and CCU differ among the different stakeholders, and both of those solutions are considered. And the further barriers are similar to the ones like in Estonia. And regarding Lithuania, Lithuania has identified some potential locations for CO2 storage, as we could see those 3 places. Also, the law is prohibiting this kind of storage, so the situation is similar like in Latvia. And yeah, after the consultations with stakeholders, it seems that the main emitters are highly interested in CCS and CCU applications in their processes. However, this legislative issues are slowing down the possible development of those technologies. And yeah, another thing about public acceptance, it seems negative due to the spread of rejective ideas related to that. So shortly about the overall situation in other project countries. Firstly, about storage potential and not potential but restrictions, and secondly about the storage capacity to understand how Baltic states look when compared to other project countries. So for the first image, as we can see, CO2 storage was prohibited in Latvia and Lithuania, but it is also prohibited in Ukraine and Slovenia. In other countries, it is permitted or partially permitted with some restrictions. And the second thing is about capacity. As I mentioned before, there is no capacity in Estonia. For Latvia, based on previous potential calculations, there is around 800 million tons of storage capacity. And according to the studies done some years ago, that could be sufficient for Latvia's needs for 350 years if all those storage facility structures could be used, of course. And yeah, for Lithuania, it's only 42 million tons of CO2 storage. And as we can see in the map, there is considerable potential for storage in Ukraine, Romania, Poland, Croatia. And yeah, if we compare this to Latvian, Estonian and Lithuanian situation, it is quite a big difference because storage potential is quite smaller, but also CO2 emission sources are not so numerous as in other project countries. Yeah, and here we come to the latest developments of the Baltic states. Because this stage on the evaluating existing situation was finished in the last year, so there has been some development since that, and the main ones are listed below. So in Estonia, CCS technologies as a topic will be included in the environmental development plan. But the limited potential and the current situation has put a stop to any planning and further development of the CCS implementation. And according to the interviews and contacts with the stakeholders, we understand that stakeholders here slowly follow the recent developments, but no concrete actions are taken or planned. For Latvia, there is quite important updates regarding this field since the end of the last year. One of that is in the field of legislative processes. Climate law is being developed in Latvia, and in this current draft, it is planned to abolish this current prohibition on the storage that I mentioned earlier, and determine the basic principles for this field and delegate the further development and responsibility to draft regulatory framework. And regarding stakeholders, there is some interaction going between the stakeholders, not only in Latvia, but in other Baltic states. And another one is a pilot project in cement manufacturer Schwenk, Latvia, about CO2 capture technology that is definitely an important step to the further development of CCS in this region. So we understand the existing situation and the latest developments, and therefore we can go to the roadmaps we have developed to quickly overlook the situation there, what we are suggesting together with experts and with consultation with stakeholders. So basically, what are the roadmaps? The roadmaps are the document that provide an overview of various actions with the aim of creating an enabling environment to deploy CCS projects here in the Baltic states. And those kind of roadmaps are developed for each project country. So about the status of those roadmaps, the final adjustments are being made in all those roadmaps, and the publication of the developed roadmaps that will be in the Word format is intended in July. So yeah, just follow the updates in the project's website and social media, and there will be there soon. And one thing to mention about the roadmaps in the Baltic states, we need to consider the similar development and similar situation in all the Baltic states. And thus there are many related actions between the Baltic states that are showed further in the roadmaps. That's why we will be talking about similar actions in the roadmaps the start, and afterwards we will present a bit more specific actions for each of the country. And regarding the structure of the national roadmaps, how they look like, basically there are 4 main groups regarding CCS, and under each group is a few key actions. And under those key actions, there could be one or more approaches or activities that are more specific. And for each this approach or activity, there is assigned stakeholder and timeline. But today we will only look at the activities, how they are grouped in those main groups, but involved stakeholders and timeline, basically this full version will be available in the final version of the roadmaps that will be published in the July in this Word format for each of the Baltic states. So about related actions between the Baltic states, as I mentioned, there is a similar situation between the Baltic states. That's why we are firstly talking about that. So the first group is scaling up research and development activities and building national knowledge and experience. And first action that could be relevant for each of the Baltic states would be nominate individuals from the ministries that would coordinate the activities from the side of the state regarding development of this. And the second option would be developing platform working groups that represent the key stakeholders, and there are similar examples of this that are operating good in our opinion. For example, regarding hydrogen in some of the Baltic countries. And this platform or working group mechanism would allow to discuss current issues, challenges, advance the development of those technologies in each country, and disseminate and accumulate the knowledge. And there could be also a potential for this in the Baltic states level, considering the size of this potential market. The next one would be create section or separate website, which would ensure the information of the development of CCS to go further. And yeah, the next action is involvement in international forums, platforms. For starts, of course, identifying the need of that, and yeah, such platforms could be like zero emissions platform, Baltic Carbon Forum, and platforms like that. But yeah, more information is in the full version of the roadmaps. The next possible actions could be monitoring funding possibilities. I must say that it is already an ongoing process, but it is important to continue this, and also to bring attention to this step. And further relevant actions for all of the countries could be analyzing existing experience and further implementing research projects and pilot projects. So about the next big group, policy standards and regulations, there is of course option to include CCS aspects more widely in the relevant existing or new policy planning documents, and as well as abolish the existing prohibitions of the storage of CO2 in national laws. Yeah, for each country there is more specific cases and developments regarding relevant policy planning documents or relevant laws, but for the big picture, the goal remains the same for all of the countries. And of course, when developing such regulatory framework, European Union CCS directive should be taken into account. And one more useful and used opportunity could be participation in ISO carbon dioxide capture, transportation, and geological storage technical committee, where there could be gained knowledge and see how those things are coordinated and done. And another one important action is joining the London Protocol and ratifying its amendment to Article 6 that allows the transboundary export of CO2. So basically, this action is relevant to Lithuania and Latvia, as both of those countries have not joined the protocol and thus accepted this ratification. But yeah, Estonia has already done that. But it is an important step if transboundary export is allowed and planned. And this aspect will be highlighted a bit further in our seminar in presentation of Michal. Yeah, so the next two groups are a bit more general. So there is a bigger overlap of those actions between the Baltic countries, but it must be said that they are still important part of the roadmap. So one of the groups is stakeholder engagement, cooperation, and know-how dissemination. And this includes actions like identifying up-to-date information, ensuring cooperation and further communication between the stakeholders, supporting regional cooperation, and supporting and organizing local and regional events. And the last group is social aspects and public support, and it also includes some more general actions like developing the communication plan according to the needs or identify the future directions, carrying out proactive communication activities, and making information on this topic more widely available. And yes, further, I can give word to my Estonian colleague Henrik to introduce you to the more distinctive aspects from the Estonian roadmap.
Yes, thanks, Valts, and hello also from my side. I'm Henrik from Civita Estonia, and been dealing with compiling the roadmap for Estonia with the help of some of the stakeholders in Estonia. So I'd like to thank all these people who provided the necessary insights. So yeah, as Valts covered the overall overlapping aspects of the three Baltic countries, then I will briefly stop on the main distinctive aspects from the Estonian roadmap. And similarly to the previous slides, we have categorized them into three groups. So starting with this scaling up research and development activities and building the national knowledge and experience, we'll list the actions, for example, that it is really important to ensure the collaboration between all the three Baltic states, and they should be accepted also on the governmental level. The main idea is to find the suitable potential for cross-border activities, be it either in the form of storing the CO2 or transporting through a single location, which is within the reach of all the relevant emitters. So yeah, in addition to that, it's important to identify the industrial clusters for shared CO2 transportation and storage infrastructure. Once again, should be evaluated on a potential cross-border connection with the Baltic states regarding the land transportation, and then with the Nordic countries regarding marine transportation of CO2 to the Nordic Sea and then to Norway, etc. And yeah, finally, as we have quite a lot of old mines in northeastern Estonia, where the majority of the oil shale production is located, then there is a high suggestion of upscaling the exploring or research of technologies that would allow to potentially use the now unused mines to store the CO2 there. However, this is quite on a high level recommendation, as the research there hasn't been done too much. From the policy and regulations point of view, we are suggested to define the direction of the scenario from the previously mentioned feasibility study. So it would be clear to all the stakeholders whether and toward which way is the overall strategy regards to CCS and CCO. So it would kind of set the pace and the direction where this topic will progress in the future. And yeah, as was previously mentioned as well, then it would be wise to, from the regulation side, to start thinking about changing the legislation regarding the storage of CO2 in geological formations, as currently it's prohibited also in Estonia, both onshore and offshore. And yeah, from the Estonian point of view, finally, a suggestion or an action regarding the stakeholder engagement and cooperation between different parties is to put in a financial framework that provides some sort of a certainty and enables them to engage on CCS development projects, and sort of also allows to, for example, separate the public and private financing components. With that, we mean that, for example, there is a mixture of financing aid, for example, that let's say bigger transportation related and infrastructure investments and projects will be co-financed by the state, and then the, let's say, direct capture and purification investments will be made by the relevant stakeholders themselves. So yeah, these are shortly the distinctive aspects from the Estonian roadmap. As Waltz mentioned, that there is quite a lot of overlap. So I guess we can move on now to the next country, which is Latvia. So giving the floor back to you, Waltz.
Yeah, thanks. So back to me, I will shortly tell you about the main distinctive aspects from the Latvian roadmap. So the first two actions are more related to financing opportunities, and one small way how to tackle financing needs could be ensuring financing opportunities from the state to the research projects in the field of CCS, including this topic in the National Research Program framework. Another one action regarding financing is related to National Climate and Energy Plan for the period 2021-2027, because we have a goal in this plan to devote at least 2% of total research and development investment in the strategic energy technology plan or set plan priorities in the field of energy to CCS, but there is not yet specific instruments developed to achieve this aspect. So yeah, specific financing instruments could be developed there. And the third one is regarding geological potential. As previously mentioned, Latvia has the most prospective sites in the region, and taking into account the existing interest there, it could be useful to identify the most potential sites for detailed geological surveys and accordingly carrying out those surveys at the identified sites. The next action is also related to the geological potential. That would be to verify and update previously obtained results from the academic research on geological storage sites and continue to implement and work on further research in this area. The next actions are related to policy standards and regulations. So first of all, CCS aspect should be incorporated in the national decarbonization projections. And as I understand, there will be updates in there, and this aspect of CCS will be included there. Yeah, the next one is abolishing the existing prohibition of storage of CO2 in geological formations through this proposed climate law, and accordingly also developing the Cabinet of Ministers regulations about this aspect, involving the main stakeholders in the development process and other necessary aspects. And one aspect related more to the social aspects and public support is related to cooperation with local governments if there is some kind of CCS related activities in their territory. Those are the main distinctive aspects from the Latvian roadmap, and I think we can go further to my colleague Povilas with Lithuanian actions that are more specific for this situation.
So hello everybody, thank you all for introduction. So I'll represent the Lithuania and the main distinctive aspects from the Lithuania roadmap. Well, mainly the first thing, as mentioned before, is to establish a knowledge platform to track the new research worldwide and share the gain insights from various researches done nearby or in the further regions, to seek opportunities to transport, mainly for now, transport carbon to other countries, since it is prohibited in Lithuania. And also we recommend to establish the industrial cluster of the most interested stakeholders to conduct more collaborative experiments, create a unified transportation systems. We would help lower the cost and make the whole pipeline of carbon transportation abroad more efficient. Also, so we recommend the government especially to support this collaboration between industry stakeholders and research centers also. So the capital from the stakeholders and ministries combined with research centers could provide the best results regarding the research and looking for the best opportunities and solutions. And also, we highly recommend to look closely, especially into the, as mentioned, CO2 transportation options. And because assuming that the underground CO2 storage prohibition law is here to stay, and well, moving on to the policy and standards, and well, we would highly recommend, especially in the beginning, to allow the carbon storage, at least for the research, because currently it is forbidden not only to store, but conduct any research. And well, there were some, before the prohibition, there were some studies conducted that said that, well, identified some of the storage places where the carbon could potentially be stored in Lithuania. So maybe the government could allow for some small scale projects to gain more insights regarding this storage facilities in Lithuania. And well, if it's proved to be safe here, maybe some larger scale industrial implementation could follow if approved by the legislative system. And also regarding the policies, we will suggest that the CCS technologies could be included in our climate combating strategies as a feasible options. And moving on to stakeholder engagement. So well, we highly recommend Lithuanian stakeholders to participate, organize international forums, and gain as much insights and as much new information as possible, and not only share it and between the closed groups, but we would also recommend disseminate this information throughout the whole country, because there is a lot of negative aspects regarding the CCS shared among the Lithuania, which led to the prohibition of storage in the first place here. So if we could provide the newest research and the risk also, well, the risks of CCS storage, carbon storage in Lithuania, and the advantages of it and how it helped to combat climate change, well, maybe this legislation could be changed, reversed in Lithuania with the help of the public support. So that's it for the Lithuania. Let's move on.
So yeah, thank you.
I guess,
yeah,
And I guess this is it for this presentation. I'm mindful that we are a bit slightly over time. So although it does say any questions, we will take questions at the end. And I would like to invite Michal now for his presentation about the overall region.
Great, thank you. I'll just try to share my screen. So, good. Could you please just let me know that you see it and that
All clear.
you could now see it in the presentation mode, right?
Yes, go on, Michal.
Good, great. So once again, thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Michal Hruby. I am a research fellow at the European Institute for European Policy. And we are actually supporting this project on behalf of Institute for European Integration based in Prague. So our organization is responsible for coordination of this work package. We also do handle Czech Republic and Slovakia in terms of research. But today I would like to maybe have some broader look at the overall project perspective. I will start with firstly the notion that, as we heard, there were some projects and that there were some CCS strategies in the past 15 years, but of course it could not easily materialize, even because the financial incentive, the financial impulse was not there. But now we see that in the last years, finally, this is changing, and this is also something that together with the unfortunate Russian aggression, forces the European Commission to maybe push a little bit forward, even with CCS. And maybe I will give you a quick insight from Chris Bolesta from European Commission, that when we look at the overall situation with CCS and its financing, we see that it's moving in the right direction. From, let's say, all the things that I have mentioned here, really the most important one is that from the Innovation Fund, which is one of the largest funds to actually provide money for CCS, there will be a new call coming autumn this year with another 3 billion euro for allocation to projects. So hopefully it will materialize in a good project. But there are more things from the European Commission being done, which should help to deploy CCS even in our region. Most importantly, there should be a document called the Vision coming out that would really draw some more specific CCUS pathways for the whole Europe. So hopefully it's moving in the right direction, but of course we want to see our region, CE region, to move forward. Here is a map from one of the last publications that can serve the purpose of CO2 Atlas, coming from a Clean Air Task Force. I just included myself the red marks, which show the location of the first 4 CCS projects that were granted money from Innovation Fund, large-scale projects call. So you can see clearly that in our region it was not very successful, but we are still waiting for the results of another of the second call. So hopefully this will materialize. And it also gives you the overview that was already given about some of the storage potential in our region. As my colleagues from EPG, from Energy Policy Group, from Romania already drafted last year a summary for our region, here is just a reminder that there is still a lot of things to implement when it comes to our legislation and regulation. So it's not only Baltic countries to have a lot of things to do as a homework. It's still in other countries, and as I do represent Czech Republic and Slovakia, we still have not really finished the transposition of the CCS directive, which has been implemented, but still we need some more implementing decree to take place and to actually really allow for commercial storage. However, the things are moving, and of course the main obstacles that we see now from our work done in the work package 4 is something that's been already mentioned, so I will probably not really surprise you with those. So first of all, when we talk about some onshore storage, there is generally a lack of experience with that. So as we have in our project some countries that are actually landlocked, so not having any sea coast, the question of onshore storage is becoming even a more crucial part of our research, and especially in countries as Czech Republic, Slovakia, and also, for example, Hungary. We see that the onshore storage plays a crucial role to actually really be able to scale up. So that's why we also deal with the incomplete regulatory framework. And as it's been already said, the public acceptance is also something that is stressed in almost each country, because it's been both, for example, Poland, but also Romania, that had scheduled previously a demonstration CCS project, which failed from various reasons, one of them being even the public acceptance. Also, of course, the probably the most important struggle, as always, the financial allocation for such projects. However, what's also important, and what I will tackle later, is that in general, in our countries, the technological perspective and the complexity of CCS projects is causing both the government but also the private sector to actually not rush into CCS, because it usually needs cooperation of many more bodies and many more subjects. So that's also something why we want to tackle the question of knowledge transfer and cooperation. And one of the last points to mention is that in all our CEE region countries, there's usually the struggle with allocation of appropriate staff, because usually on the ministries you will not find that many possibilities actually who would be really covering the topic of CCS. So these are just some basic obstacles. And what we will also propose in our summary CEE roadmap, we could call it like no regret actions, which you already heard about from the previous speakers, because usually it's not that we would need to implement anything that's financially costly or something. It's now starting about some no regret actions, which are actually quite low when it comes to effort and budget. So mostly we have to say and realize that there is many international bodies and many European level initiatives already covering CCUS research and already transferring the knowledge from all the respective parts of CCUS value chain. So not being only a CCUS set plan, but also other, as for example, European Zero Emissions Platform and others that do actually give all the necessary tools that we need to actually spread the CCS knowledge and to help it to also spread towards CEE region. That's why we proposed in most countries to really start and form some CCS dedicated platform, which is, I would say, a very basic step to have some advisory body to the government that could actually cooperate with some working group on the respective ministries. And that is something that we actually could do very quickly, because we have the companies, we have the universities, and there is many of people who could actually join. And the more it's of course then important to have this advisory board if we go into the direction of inclusion of CCS in the respective national strategies, because as you heard from Waltz, of course there is both climate long-term strategy plans and national energy and climate plans that should be actually revised in next year 2023 and 2024. So such advisory bodies would actually have a very strategic position. And then, of course, we get into some more detailed recommendations as the ratification of the Article 6 amendment of the London Protocol and the transfer of knowledge which comes from, for example, IPCC and other global bodies. So that's it. And now I'd like to move on to have a look at some examples of actions, because of course I will touch upon some examples of other countries, mostly in the Central Europe, and I will maybe stick a bit more to Czechia and Poland. So first of all, I'll start with Hungary. As I don't have to speak about the financial struggles maybe too much, and I don't have to tackle again the issues connected to legislation. Usually these problems are very similar in case of CO2 storage. In Hungary, there is quite a specific situation that, for example, they strongly vote for use of hydrogen, and also that's connected then to the CO2 market that they actually wanted to create. And CO2 market is something that will be beneficial for CCS deployment, but there is a lot of standardization needed actually to support any type of CO2 market and any type of, for example, low carbon products. So in Hungary, some tasks related to our roadmap will really tackle these issues, how to actually combine building infrastructure for hydrogen together with the infrastructure for CO2. In Romania, I already mentioned there was a previously cancelled demonstration CCS project plan in Getica, which was planned in 2011 and should have been materialized later in let's say those years. But because of the financial risks and because of the non-really profitable investment plan, the project was stopped. And this is something that is now the main issue probably in Romania, and that's actually how to set the regulatory framework in connection to the investment risk. So they mostly look for ways how to persuade the stakeholders that the regulatory framework is already having the necessary backup plans, so not to repeat the failure of Project Getica. One of those actions is, of course, to come up with a national CCS strategy that would actually finally make CCS really visible in the national perspective. Now I can come back to Czechia and Slovakia. So basically in the Czech Republic, the situation is now that we will start our EU presidency in July, and it's also the right time to start communicating on behalf of CEE region. So there are a couple of things that are now undergoing a revision under the EU ETS. So this is one of the main topics. Of course, some of you heard, I'm sure, about Fit for 55 package and necessary legislation that should be revised in the upcoming months. Some of this communication about these revisions will be also managed by Czech Republic. So the question is, for example, in regards to EU ETS, how the revenues from these will be recycled. In the current proposal, there is an ambition to actually recycle those revenues really directly into green projects. So it would not be possible that, as we see now in Czechia, most of these EU ETS revenues are actually going into the general state budget, and it's not very well, so to say, visible of how these are then used as to support different green projects. So one action that we propose is really to return those revenues into the industries that are now being the most challenged when it comes to the ETS price. Another recommendation from our side is to cooperate more closely with the EIB, with the European Investment Bank, because as most our Czech stakeholders, for example, do not have the contact and do not have the knowledge of how EIB can help when it comes to all the project management and advisory to CCS with their even technological experts. So this is also one thing that could be pursued on the European level. When I moved to Slovakia, here we can see that the focus is clearly made on a different type of CO2 storage in case of mineralization or carbonation, which are actually part of so-called CCU, but still actually they're waiting, and it's now being drafted by the European Commission, a proper guidelines for those CCU actions. So, so to say, maybe a bit more positive on the side of Czechia, we have currently 2 projects ongoing that do explore the possibility of CO2 storage, and one is actually striving to prepare a pilot storage field for CO2 injection in 2024. So we will see how this will develop. And lastly, I will go back to something that's more close to the Baltic countries, and that's situation CCS in Poland. They mostly, of course, need to tackle the possibilities for CO2 transport to the North Sea, to Norway. So actually one of these, So actually one of these, of course, goes back to the London Protocol. And if you look at the map on the border of Czechia and Poland, you can actually see an area which is full of these CO2 emission sources. It's Silesia, and that's one of these very prospective areas that they want to explore further possibilities of CO2 storage inland. That's also where we in Czech Republic look after, because this is example actually of one of these areas that could be prospectively used for a CO2 storage hub. But of course, that's a question and a matter of time. Currently, a pilot strategy project has started or will start very soon now, and that will also tackle this question of CO2 storage hub in Silesia. Then we have an ongoing EU CCS interconnector and access project. The EU CCS interconnector is also being one of these very prospective projects for interim CO2 storage hub before transportation to North Sea. And for example, from the perspective of Czech Republic, it's also nice to see that very closely to Czech borders in Goradze cement plant, which is, we can say, still a very southern part of Poland. There is a question of how they will actually transport CO2 up to the Gdańsk storage hub. So we see that there are some intentions about a long-range CO2 transport, which actually Czech Republic could watch closely. And I think it's also a positive sign for the development of some infrastructure and international cooperation projects. But we will hear more about it from Michal Vendolovský right after. So I think I can just finish my presentation with some next steps that we await. So first of all, of course, we will publish the national roadmaps that are done during this work package 4. And it will also include some summary reports on the regional perspective. For example, what we can see, and I already mentioned that in the CEE roadmap, we will have a look at more some of these European level initiatives or European level knowledge transfer that could happen and help our region. We plan to present those in our Brussels conference, which is planned in September. Maybe Michal will mention a bit more. And of course, during the planned next work package 5, we hopefully will deliver some results when it comes to some changes and some shift in the way we think about CCS deployment in our region. So that's it from my side for now, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Michal. And I think that you have made a fairly good introduction for the other Michal, who will explain a bit about the latest developments in transportation and all things considered carbon capture and storage. So Michal, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Thanks a lot for inviting me. So my name is Michał Wędołowski. I'm working at Bellona Europa. It's an European environmental NGO based in Brussels. And we are also one of the project partners in the CCS4CEE project in the role of an expertise partner. So we agreed with Civita that it would maybe be a good idea today to present a couple of projects, emerging CCS projects from other parts of Europe, with one common denominator. They all have a cross-border transport element, and so I'll try to introduce some of them and then also spend some time discussing about the London Protocol. So I'm just checking if you guys can see the presentation. Okay.
Yeah, full screen.
Great. I'm gonna kick off with Porthos. It's one of the most known emerging CCS projects. And actually, this one is not really a cross-border project, but I'll explain later why I included it. It still has a couple of interesting features that will also be able to identify in other projects. So what is Porthos? It's a CO2 transport hub, an offshore storage project located in the vicinity of the port of Rotterdam, one of the biggest ports in Europe and one of the biggest industrial hubs in Europe. There are three companies behind the infrastructural part of this project, namely the port of Rotterdam itself. So the authorities of the port, together with the Dutch gas producer EBN, and the Dutch gas network operator Gasunie. Interesting to note, all of those three companies have some element of state control. So you can already see that at this stage, the Dutch state is quite heavily involved in supporting this project. On the capture side, we have 4 emitting sources: Air Liquide, Air Products, ExxonMobil, and Shell. So big international companies. And the idea is to use a CO2 pipeline to collect CO2 from these emitting sources, and then to transport that CO2 into a nearby depleted gas field on the Dutch waters in the North Sea. The start of the project is planned in 2024 or early 2025. It's already quite well advanced, but they have not yet made a final investment decision, as they are currently working on all the permitting procedures and collecting sort of gauging what would be the detailed volume that emitters are expecting to capture and to store via this project. So this project in the Netherlands has lately been somewhat expanded. It's not part of the same project, but it is connected with the port of Rotterdam. I'm talking about the Delta Corridor project. And this project will be based on a system of pipelines where, apart from a CO2 pipeline that is planned, there will be also pipelines carrying hydrogen, LPG, and propylene between 3 major industrial hubs: the chemical cluster in Camelot, in the south part of the Netherlands, the industrial cluster in the Rhineland, and the port of Rotterdam. So here as well, we have an example of a public-private partnership with the Dutch government providing some of the funding for the project and including this project in its multi-year program for the deployment of energy and climate infrastructure. As far as industrial sectors are concerned, we have representatives of the petrochemical industry, the steel industry, and the cement industry. And the project is supposed to start already in 2026. Then near Rotterdam or across the border, we also have another example. This is Kairos at Sea, across border open access CCS value chain to be deployed in the port of Antwerp by a collaboration of two major chemical companies, BASF and Air Liquide. And the idea here is to capture CO2 emissions from the production of hydrogen, ammonia, and ethylene oxide from the BASF installations in Antwerp. And after capturing and liquefying the CO2, it would be transported by CO2 vessels to the broader North Sea basin. What is interesting about this project is one of the 7 large-scale projects that Michal mentioned in his presentation that have been awarded funding from the Innovation Fund last year. So interesting thing is that out of these 7 large-scale projects, no less than 4 of them are actually associated with CCS. So that shows us that the Commission is quite serious in supporting CCS, and that's where the Commission is also putting the revenues from EU ETS funneled through the Innovation Fund. There is also some funding from the Flemish government, as we know, Antwerp is part of the Flanders region in Belgium. And my last example is has also been mentioned by Michal. It's the Poland EU CCS interconnector hub located in the port of Gdańsk, northern Poland on the Baltic coast. This is also an open access project. This one is interesting for many reasons, but one of them is, as Michal mentioned, it's received a status of the project of common interest, which allows this project to have accelerated permitting procedures. So basically, they received EU funding from the EU budget, the part of the EU budget that is called Connecting Europe Facility, CEF. The idea is to capture CO2 from the area near Gdańsk and also from some industrial sites located inland in Poland, transport that CO2 to the port of Gdańsk, and then send it off by ships for storage in the North Sea. And we have 5 organizations that are supporting this project or the promoters of this project, namely Air Liquide, the Port of Gdańsk, the Polish oil company PKN Orlen, a cement producer Lafarge Cement, and a French shipping company called Sogestron Shipping. This perhaps I could skip, as Michal Hrube has already discussed what the European Commission has in its plans for CCS. So this is just to say that the European Commission has launched some studies to map out the potential EU-wide CO2 infrastructure in Europe. So I'm going to skip this one. And I'd like to spend some time discussing the London Protocol, as it's widely believed to be one of the key legal issues that can either block or enable cross-border movement of CO2 in the marine environment. So important to say that the London Protocol is an agreement under the auspices of the International Maritime Organization, or IMO. IMO is a UN body, is a UN United Nations organization that deals with environmental issues around international shipping. And so before we talk about the London Protocol, its precursor was actually called the London Convention, and it was agreed already in the 70s and entered into force in mid-70s as a convention on the prevention of marine pollution by dumping of wastes and other matter. Why is it important? It's because it had been widely, CO2 had been considered as a waste, and therefore at that time storing CO2 in the offshore marine environment was not allowed, or at least it was not regulated. So then there was a growing need to do something with that. And also in parallel, there was a realization that the London Convention from the 70s has to be somewhat updated. And so in the mid-90s, members of the IMO agreed to on a London Protocol, a sort of separate treaty, but dealing with the same topics as the London Convention. And so in 1996, the London Protocol was agreed, and eventually it entered into force in 2006. Here we have a map in the lower left corner, the global map of the parties of the London Convention and the London Protocol. And I also pasted a zoomed in map to see which countries in Europe are parties to the London Convention and the London Protocol. You can see that from the Baltic countries, Estonia is party to the London Protocol, whereas Latvia and Lithuania have not ratified even the London Convention. Now, again, why is London Protocol important for the CCS area? As I said previously, sequestrating CO2 or putting CO2, storing CO2 in the marine environment was not allowed or was not regulated. And so in 2007, after the London Protocol entered into force, there were already first amendments made that allowed an exemption for CO2. So an annex was added to the protocol, which allows for what they call the dumping of CO2 in the sub-seabed geological formations. So this change in 2007 made it possible for offshore CO2 storage in the international UN law. The second important development in the context of the London Protocol and CCS is another amendment to Article 6 of the protocol, which allowed for transboundary or cross-border shipments of CO2 for the purpose of CCS. However, this amendment, which would allow for export of CO2 from one country to another country, which would include crossing the sea border, had to be ratified by 2/3 of the protocol parties. But it has proven to be quite difficult, as during more than a decade, only a handful of countries actually ratified that amendment. And so that led parties of the London Protocol to come up with a provisional solution which was agreed in 2019. Namely, two countries that are parties to the London Protocol can actually agree to transport CO2 between themselves, provided that they provide a declaration of provisional application and notification to the IMO, that they meet the standards prescribed by the protocol, and that they sign bilateral agreements. However, since that workaround that was agreed in 2019, we have not yet seen any bilateral agreement signed so far. But reportedly, two countries, Norway and Sweden, are working on such an agreement, and this kind of agreement will provide a template for other countries and is going to be crucial for enabling international cross-border maritime transport of CO2. So summing up, I wanted to share a couple of thoughts that I thought would be interesting to keep in mind. So if we look at the projects that I introduced, there are some common denominators. One of them is that all of them have some form of public-private partnership. They are also around industrial clusters, and that requires coordination between governments, emitters, and infrastructure operators. We can also see in these projects that there are multiple transport modalities, so it's not just pipelines. Some projects are also considering CO2 vessels, barges, railway, and road transport. All these infrastructural projects are planned to be cross-border and open access, so open for future emitters to actually join and transport additional volumes of CO2 by new emitters, or are betting on storing CO2 in the North Sea, which indeed has a huge potential long term. But what we need to keep in mind is that there might be some operational bottlenecks, because already now for example, in the case of the Norwegian project, Northern Lights, we know that there's a huge interest from emitters to join the project, and it is currently oversubscribed. Then we can also see that all these projects enjoy some form of EU support, whether from the Innovation Fund or from the Connecting Europe Facility funding. And time-wise, we expect them to be operational by 2030, and some of them as early as in 2 years. But let's keep in mind, especially for stakeholders in our region, that these kind of projects take many years, up to decades. So if our region doesn't want to stay behind, actions should be taken already today. And finally, in reference to the London Protocol, we need to keep in mind that international bilateral agreements are going to be key for cross-border offshore projects, and therefore governments need to take action here. I put together a couple of useful resources in the slideshow that I can share with people if there is interest, and that would be all from my side.
Thank you, Michal. Really interesting presentation, and I guess the takeaway, at least for me, is that it's really hard to do something on your own. And if we look into what's happening in Europe, let's see, more to the south and more to the west from our region focus today. So companies and governments are doing joint projects across the borders. And this is one of the reasons why this particular event is like 3 countries in one, rather than 3 different, talks in 3 different countries. And in our countries in particular, and by our countries I meaning Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, is that we probably have to think about first steps. So to allow potential, or to allow thinking about carbon capture and storage, to do anything, more. But we believe it might be a logical thing to do. And that's where, let's say, the roadmaps come into play. So if you want to, let's say, enable this tool for decarbonization, these are the steps that might be taken. So so with this, we conclude our today's official part, but we still have some time if you wish to discuss any questions you might have or any remarks you might have. And I guess we still have all of the speakers here, so you can address any of the questions to any of the speakers, if you want. So, Val, do we have any questions in the chat?
Seems that no.
No. Great. If not, this is not the last time. Oh, Robert. Yeah, Robert, please.
Yeah, I wanted to comment perhaps on that slide 7. I think it was in Val's presentation. This map with the threshold of CO2 emissions or sources greater than 1 million tons per year. If we strictly use that threshold, then Baltics look very underrepresented. If one would include, I don't know, approximately 1 million tons, and at least 2 cement plants, a couple of power plants would also appear in the Baltics, perhaps a more representative and overview. Something to think about.
This is completely right, actually. So we probably are thinking about emission sources in the hundreds of thousands of tons per year. So that let's say details the map more. Yeah, thanks for the remark. Yeah, and then Gatis also has a question. So Gatis, please.
Yes, thank you. I have the question regarding CCU, utilization of CO2. You gave a very interesting examples of ongoing projects for carbon capture and storage. Do you have an information? Are there any projects for producing, for example, synthetic fuels from CO2 and hydrogen ongoing along with these carbon capture projects? How that technology is developing? Utilization of CO2 into synthetic fuels, or maybe into some other kind of products which could be used in industry.
Okay, well, Michal, maybe you want to take this question, or should I answer?
Which Michal this time?
Yeah.
Any Michal. Well, I can maybe start, and you can add. So I guess the main project is in carbon capture and storage, to be honest, not utilization, just because of the scale of potential, let's say, tool. So sequestration is really, you can really do it on a much more broad basis rather than utilization, although utilization also has its own potential. And in terms of synthetic fuels, well, I guess it's really in the beginning development phase of this. So I guess if you look into the costs, so that's not even comparable. First you have to decarbonize hydrogen, then you can think about the fuels. Yeah, but that is potential on the table. But yeah, maybe one or both of the Michals can add.
Maybe I can then start. Like there are CCU projects around Europe, and I'm pretty sure that they're developing at, I would say, a necessary scale when it comes to different business models. But actually, as I'm sure the other Michal will focus on, is that our project, as it covers CCS and we really focus on decarbonization, most of other CCU technologies are actually not preventing that much of a CO2 ending up in the atmosphere. So in our project, if we covered CCU, it was mostly only connected to types of CCU as its mineralization or carbonation, which means like creation of, so to say, a solid CO2 that can be utilized, for example, in construction. But as you mentioned, like there are different projects and that do tackle CO2 as, for example, creation of e-fuels and so on, but these were not really focused in our project.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can echo what Michal has just said. The main reasons are that the scope of the project was focused on CCS, and I would say rightfully so. The second is that CCU, apart from some CCU applications, is not a permanent way of storing CO2 away from the atmosphere, and this is the ultimate objective of our climate efforts. Also in the view of the target of the climate neutrality target, which assumes zero emissions, or at least some residual emissions to be offset or neutralized by removals. And Ervinas was on point as well about hydrogen. I would just add that CCU processes tend to be very energy intense and consume large amounts of energy, and for CCU fuels to have good climate impact, all that electricity used in those processes would have to be from renewable sources, or in any case low or zero carbon sources, which today is hard to get in sufficient scale. And if we were to divert that electricity away from direct electrification through, for example, electrified transport or direct electrification of industrial processes, if we were to divert this electricity for the purpose of CCU, I'm not sure whether that would be beneficial for our climate policy.
Thank you very much for your answers.
You're welcome.
So Robert has another remark and or question.
Yep, about CCU, we understand that this utilization part has not been the scope of this research study, but actually really make sense to perhaps do a market study of the CO2 consumption in unprocessed form and how much it can be raised in the Baltics if, say, some installations have post-combustion, perhaps even in capture projects. Because currently we've talked, say, to Lindegas about the current situation and also have taken a look at our own use of CO2, which is currently supplied then from and oil processing plants in the Nordics, and there's definitely sources which can rather use sites which could use more CO2, say greenhouses or food industry or others, if it were more available from existing installations. So such a market study in the Baltics perhaps would be good to make, and by consultants. It's a market study where you need to call and interview people basically. So that's perhaps also something to think about for CETA.
Fair enough. Thank you for the comment. It's definitely not a bad thing to investigate.
I would just add that often CCU projects want to get public funding. So that one of the reasons why we as Bellona are so vigilant about this, if I can say so, is that this is indeed about the use of public money. So if you can find a market rationale for CCU without tapping into public funding, then and if you comply, if a project would comply with and with like strong carbon accounting in place, then okay, let's let it be. But what we just need to be careful about is that the public money is used, and also the resources of the scarce resources of renewable electricity are used where they are the most, where they are needed the most.
Thanks, Robert, again. Do you have any other remarks or questions? Well, I guess one thing to say is that all of the roadmaps and also, let's say, summaries and broader regional picture will be available on our website. So I guess the easiest way to find it is just to use the hashtag CCS4CEE. You can do that in LinkedIn, let's say, and you'll find it easily. And also, yeah, let's say for those who are registered, I guess we'll send some information so that you can follow up on the project. And otherwise, if there are no more questions, I want to thank all for participation, and also thank you for the input that you provided so far. And yeah, have a nice day and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.